Welcome to Dave's Training Room. Today we are installing an ESU Loksound 58741 Loksound 5 microdecoder into a Kato FEF3 locomotive. We're doing something a little different now. General practice is that we install the biggest speaker we can get inside a given box. In this case, it's going to be a tender, which we can get a pretty good sized speaker in there. But I wanted to do this with the beginner in mind. I don't want to have to modify this thing, not a whole bunch. Now in this case I did modify one piece, and you'll see in the video which one it is, but I wanted to keep this to a minimum. So I'm installing a tiny speaker. We used a little math to develop, or to figure out what size of enclosure I needed. I put the enclosure together. So what we're using is Soundtrax's 810162 mini cube 3 speaker. What the size of this speaker now is really tiny. We're talking 5mm by 12mm by 3mm thick. Very, very small. But I'm still going to get some fairly decent size sound out of it. This is without cutting any holes in the tender to get air to escape, anything like that. We're not modifying it at all. So if this is interesting to you, stay tuned. Okay, so let's talk about this installation. Um, First of all, we're pairing up a really great decoder, ESU Loksound's 58741, with Kato again, our outstanding locomotive. There's really nothing bad to say. Um, First of all, ease of installation. Let's cover that first. This particular install is about as easy as it gets. It almost seems complicated because you worry about getting wires between the engine and the tender. Well, Kato really made this simple. Uh, the fact that a readily made decoder by several manufacturers, all drop in, they took advantage of that. This decoder is easy to install. One comes in, one goes out, no modification, no requirement to change anything in the locomotive, all drop in. If you're going with the standard LED light package in the locomotive, the light's already on board. You don't have to do anything. Drops right in. And it doesn't matter whose decoder you get, it's pretty much the same. Now, the tender, a little bit different. The tender, you would think, and I wish companies would get on board with this, knowing the fact that you have a tender and you're going to put a speaker in, go ahead and manufacture a baffle in there. Well, in this case, we still didn't have one. So what are we going to do? General practice is you put the biggest speaker in the tender so you can get a lot of big sound. Well, here I'll tell you, technology today, that's not required. There are manufacturers out there in the audio world that have very, very tiny speakers making huge sound. Just look at your cell phones. Cell phones are very, very thin. Their speakers are very, very, very tiny. Their baffles that they build for their speakers are large. So that's what we did here. We coupled a tiny, tiny speaker with a large baffle that's easily fit inside the space that they gave inside this tender. So what do we do? What do we gain for this? Basically, the fact that we had no modification to do inside the tender. General practice, when you take the weights out, you get a big speaker in there. There's two little tubes that hold the weight down to keep it from vibrating. Generally, those tubes had to come out. That's one modification. Two, to make more room to get the speaker in the tender, you had to take the weights out. Okay, that to me reduces the weight in the tender. It's going to affect pickup, I imagine. So the last modification, usually people try to get sound out of the tender, is they start drilling holes, little air holes to be able to pass sound through. None of that is needed. No modification to the tender at all. What I did do was the levels of the deck inside the tender was not exactly perfectly flat, and that's due to the hold downs that hold the weight on it. So what I did is I just glued a little bit of plastic in there to raise the baffle up just to clear all that, and that way we don't have to do any real modifications to the tender at all. So what do? We didn't change the weight of the tender. In fact, we increased it. The weight of the speaker was added to it. Since we took nothing out, I feel that this is an increase, however slight. Now, this speaker doesn't weigh a lot, but it's still increased the weight of the tender. So I believe it's going to increase our making the connection between the wheel and the track. So with that said, the sound is excellent. You can hear it here sitting next to me. It is pretty loud. The tiny package, believe it or not, you wouldn't think. If I opened up this tender and showed it to you, you wouldn't believe how small it is, and you're getting all that sound out of it. Just a little experiment. If you take a speaker, put it inside a chamber, and put it inside a tunnel, something like, believe it or not, something as simple as a toilet paper roll. Just stick it down in there. First, play the speaker outside of the roll and just shove it inside of the roll and listen to the dramatic difference. That's pretty much what we're getting here. The tender itself is a chamber. The opening in the front, they left it there on purpose. The front of the tender is actually an open tube, so it would be natural. It's a natural spot to place a speaker so that the sound will escape that little hole. Now this little hole is right between the tender and the engine. I think this is ideal because now the sound is closer to the locomotive, and it sounds like it's coming from the locomotive. I don't have an engine that sounds like the sound is coming out of the tender. Okay, so with that said, the install is simple. I like doing it like this because now hopefully I can encourage a guy that's just starting. Modeling skills are still being developed. The idea of it is here we have quite an expensive locomotive, but I don't want a guy to be reluctant to take it apart and actually do an install like this. It can easily be done. There's nothing that you got to worry about. The disassembly of the model is straightforward. Disassembly of the tender is straightforward. The installation of the board is straightforward. And the manufacturing of the baffle doesn't take a lot of skill. In fact, it doesn't have to look pretty because it's hidden inside the tender. So I hope this encouraged you to do this. I think it's great. I think the decoder itself is awesome. Coupled with an excellent locomotive, you have a very good package. This is the setup, the same decoder that you get when you actually buy this with the Loksound decoder installed. Since we installed it ourselves, we saved about $120 over buying a locomotive with just DCC in it. Okay, the decoder itself is around $120. The speaker itself was about 15 bucks. If you add that to the cost of a DC locomotive, you're saving a lot because the locomotive with the DCC installed is quite expensive. So the fact that you did it saved you a little money. The fun of the installation is part of the model hobby. So with that said, the only drawback, there is one I foresee with this. The fact is that these decoders are coming blank, meaning that there is no sound package installed. Here's the thing, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you have a hobby shop that is willing to support you, and that once you get your decoder installed, you can actually take it there and have them load the sound package in. The flip side of that is, if you want to do it yourself, you have to have EXU's programmer. Now, that's not a big problem. The only problem is the availability of programmers. I tried to go and buy one now. There are a handful of them that these were released earlier in the year. They sold out very fast, mostly by the vendors, which I understand it, that the vendor is going to sell their decoder. They want to be able to support it. So that's part of the idea of having one of these. A guy like me, I want to be able to do it myself. I like being self-sufficient as far as doing an install like this. So I don't have a programmer because the ones that are left are getting up there in price. I know there are only a handful of them out there, so they can pretty much ask what they want. Well, I'm going to wait for the next issue of it. I've already got one on order. If you plan to go this route and don't want to buy the programmer right now is averaging about $150. I've seen some down as far as $140, but there are very few of them. They're more between $150 and $170. So you can see what I mean as far as they're taking advantage of the fact that there's very few of them out there. When you buy one from your local hobby shop. Buy one with the understanding that your local hobby shop will be able to upload the sound package for you. Because if you don't, you will have to mail your locomotive somewhere to get the sounds installed on them if you don't have the programmer. Okay, so that's the only drawback. So before you go and buy this decoder, which I recommend you do, if you go and buy this decoder, make sure who you buy it from is close enough that once you get it installed, you can take it there and have them install the sound package for you. And that is the only drawback. For some of us, it's a big drawback. For me, I have a local hobby shop. He has the programmer. They were more than willing to do the sound package for me. I did the install, tested it, make sure it all worked fine. Now, with that said, the decoder does come with an extremely basic sound package. It's just a little horn, a couple of little ticks and little whirring sounds, just so you can verify that your package was installed correctly. Once you do that, then you can take it over there and they can do it. Other than that, that is it. Thank you so much for watching.